So, I mean,
Yeah.
thanks very much for speaking to me. Congratulations. I just finished the book a couple of hours ago, and I loved it to bits. It's great. It's very different. I mean, it's very you, but it's very different at the same time. Was there a specific reason or decision why you decided to go for something a little bit? I mean, you've done different things before, different genres, but it felt really different from what I've read from you before.
I mean, yeah, you know, I tend to think um that all my books are fairly unique, and I don't when I write something or when I come up with an idea for something, I don't really I don't really worry too much about what genre is this
Right.
or and I think more about, do I like the story? Does the story resonate with me? Does it excite me as a writer? Um, and then, however that turns out, it turns out. As Stephen King once said on the Talking Scared podcast, he said he never really sits down to write a horror story. He sits down to write the best story he can. And
Yeah.
because his compass only tends to point one way, it usually ends up becoming a horror story. And I think it's probably similar with me. I never really, I have a story. My next novel that I'm probably going to be working on over the spring and summer. I don't know how it's going to go, but I could see it going sci-fi or I could see it going horror as far as how it's categorized. Um, but well, probably horror.
Right.
So yeah, when I came up with the idea for the third rule of time travel, to me it was just like another idea, another story that I wanted to write. And as far as how I write it, or the way it reads, if that's part of the question, again, one of the things I always come up with first before I start a project, before I start writing the project, after I've outlined for the most part, outlined it and everything, is what's the tone of this book? Um, my novel Gothic has a very different tone than, say, Boys in the Valley. And I think Third Rule of Time Travel has a different tone than both of those books. And so I kind of think of what's the tone for this book and what's the best way to tell this story. Um, do I want to like, do I want to, what's the pacing going to be? Am I going to, is this going to be something that's more prose rich? Am I going to really get into the poetic nature of describing things and discussing feelings. And it's like, philosophy and psychology. Am I going to put more of that into it, or is this like a haunted house, or a roller coaster ride? So I always think about those things before I begin writing because it impacts how I write the story. So
Sure.
in this case, with Third Rule of Time Travel, I knew I was playing with some well-worn themes, as far as time travel is concerned, as far as changing the present is concerned. Um, and I knew that I had a lot of technical information that I had to get through to the reader. So I wanted to keep the pacing pretty fast as far as how I wrote it, as far as how it reads. I think it probably reads fairly cleanly. It's a little bit more of you're ice skating, at a pretty slick surface for this one. Whereas like my novel Serafina, which came out from Earthling late last year and is coming out from Clash in a trade edition
Next
in
year, maybe. Yeah.
2026. Yeah, that one is more, at least the way I perceive it as the writer, that one is a little bit more it's a little richer, it's a little deeper, it's a little more textual, a little more visceral. So
Mhm.
to answer your long answer to your
Yeah.
question, that's
No,
kind of my
sure.
approach to each book. Yeah.
Is that something that you do just out of personal preference, or is that something about kind of thinking about what you think your readers might kind of want next or not
It's
expect next? I don't know.
Yeah, for me,
Bit of both.
it's all in service to the story. So like I said, what's the best way to tell this story? And like so, with Serafina, for example, that's historical horror. It's it's a little more body horror. There's a lot of elements to that story that I really wanted the reader to feel like they were immersed in that world because it takes place, in 1860s in a completely undeveloped part of the United States, so I really wanted to get across the feel of the lack of civilization, the intensity of uh, um, the environment, the dangers of the environment. So I really wanted to take my time with that and really get into the flora and fauna of it all. Um, whereas um yeah, so whereas as other is like things like this, I just like time travel. I wanted, like I said, I wanted to keep it fast. With Gothic, I knew that was a story that I wanted to be kind of an old school throwback feel. So I really wrote it in the rhythms and style of sort of like 80s and 90s horror novels, very purposely because I wanted that to be the vibe of the story. And I just, like I said, so the decision is not really I don't really do it for me or for the,
Right.
I guess I do it for the reader indirectly, but I'm really like, my number one goal is always what's the best way to tell this story. Um, and then I kind of let it fall where
So
it may as far
play
as
itself,
how it's
man. Yeah, find the
received.
right beats. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned that you like to kind of to decide whether it's very literally focusing on the prose, maybe philosophical. This one kind of mixes a lot of different things because I mean, a lot of time travel books or movies they're not very philosophical or anything like that. It's very much kind of just very very fast paced and all these different things happen. But here, you really do kind of go into especially kind of certain things about philosophy. You kind of
Yeah.
I think you talk a little bit. But reading between the lines, I kind of understood a bit that you were maybe comparing humanity with AI a little bit going on there, maybe a little bit. I'm not sure. Was that something that you specifically you kind of peppered in there a bit?
Well, with the dangers of technology, I think is a theme you could definitely suggest, and also the speed of which this, you know, it's like uh, there's a scientist, Ray Kurzweil, who wrote a book, The Singularity is Near, and he talks about the advancement of technology and how it's getting incrementally faster. And meaning what took 100 years, then took 10 years, is now taking a year, and how and it's continuing to shrink. And with AI, and I mean, I actually wrote to give to actually to make my own point. I wrote this book, AI as it is today, as it's commonly used today, was not commonly used at all. I wrote this book probably 3 years ago.
Right.
Um, so at that time it was really not. It was probably more about smartphone technology and social media and and quantum computing and all that kind of stuff. Whereas now it could definitely be read as, but AI, and I think. But I think as far as the philosophical aspects, because this isn't really a traditional, adventure time travel story. They're not traveling back to dinosaurs. There's no dinosaurs is the way I always describe it. This isn't a book
Yeah.
with dinosaurs or
Or cowboys or
it's not
nothing like
HG.
that.
It's not H.G. Wells. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah. So I think in that sense, I wanted to definitely explore some of the some of the. I think the way I would describe it would be um, the universe, how the universe would respond to mankind using technology that maybe they shouldn't be using. It's sort of a Tower of Babel, a
Yeah.
parable in that it's about, if you go too far, um, are you upsetting the natural order of things? And I think I kind of played with I kind of played with the idea that the universe was sort of pushing back in this book, and what that would look like if the universe was like, whoa, 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 like we're not going to do that,
Mhm.
um, and the chaos element of time travel, the chaos element of what do we really know and about even theoretical time travel and what it would impact. And I think one of the things I do in this book that and this is not a spoiler, but one of the things I do in this book that maybe hasn't been done in other time travel books is I get into a little bit of the unknown um, variants of playing with this kind of toy. There's obviously there's the butterfly effect, which is more the plot, the more top level plot that
Mhm.
goes on throughout the book. But there's some sub level plots too where, and I kind of explore a little bit of this near the end of the book, where I get into the philosophy of doing something like time travel and how much of that um, you wouldn't, how much of that you don't know what will happen. You don't know the consequences, and you don't even know ultimately the science of it, to the extent that you think you do. And I think there's a whole world that that you're going to kind of tap into of unknown knowledge that by doing something like what Beth does in the book. And I thought that was really interesting. It was really interesting to me that and I kind of made it purposeful that as much detail as I gave to how the mechanics of time travel worked in the book, I also really wanted to make sure that the reader knew that, like, but they didn't really know what they were doing. I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of the book is about them trying to figure out these final pieces of the puzzle. How is the machine targeting? That was a big thing that comes up throughout. How is, like, they had the algorithms, and they had the software, and they had the hardware, and they had the basic technology pieces, and they knew what it did, but they didn't know what the ripple effects of that would be, and they didn't really ultimately never really fully understand what the machine could do, or what the machine literally did um, to the human consciousness. And so those were all themes that I really had fun exploring. And I think to that extent, yeah, I got a little philosophical with sort of that the nature versus science of it all.
Hmm. At the same time, I mean, especially towards at the beginning more towards the beginning of the book, the main character Beth. I don't want to give too much away about her character, but
Yeah.
she's she's very kind of she feels. I mean, I suppose there's an actual phrase, there's a quote that I've got from here somewhere. It says, she feels like her husband Coulson's like a genius man scientist, whereas she's treated more like a genius female sidekick. No, this is something
Yeah.
that kind of plays very strongly towards the beginning of the book. Was that something? Was there any specific reason why you chose the female character and also to have her kind of feeling this way to relate it to time travel in this book?
Oh, as it pertains to time travel, well, nothing as it pertains. I think Beth's character is very complex. And I was having a conversation um, uh, a couple weeks ago with somebody about Beth's character specifically, and we were kind of she had read the book, and we were just kind of discussing it and the complexities of it. And I think one of the things that I wanted to get across with Beth was, she definitely, she has an edge to her. She's got a chip on her shoulder, right?
Right.
And I think she also has great emotional depth and awareness. And I think she also has this amazing alacrity of emotions, where she can kind of bend to whatever she needs to bend to. And when she has to confront the CEO about something that has to do with the machine or her project, she's incredibly hard-nosed about it, and she's very direct about it, and she's very confrontational about it. But then I really made a point to want to juxtapose that with how she is with her daughter at home, and the softness of that, and the emotional depth of that, and then those kind of things kind of collide, right? At a
Mhm.
certain point of the book. And as far as Colson is concerned, and her relationship with her husband, and maybe her feeling of being a sidekick, I wanted to. The reason I kind of did that was because I really wanted to explore, the idea of her battling his ghost in more ways than one throughout the story, and kind of also exploring a little bit about how she needed to kind of come to terms with her loss and her feelings of maybe being a subordinate, or maybe being, not being the one who's in charge, even though, and I reveal this in the book, it was basically her science and her ideas that made the machine work. So I thought it also, I think there's an element of that where I think maybe a lot of women who are in positions of power have to fight that duality of, like, when to be hard nosed and when to be pliable, and because there's just such a difference um, for women, when in that sense, because they're dealing with so much more backlash, and so much there's so many more variables that they have to be aware of that maybe men don't. So I thought that was interesting for her, as for Beth, to go through that and sort of have that journey, emotionally and psychologically.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, Also, I'm very curious. I mean, obviously, diving into a time travel book is always going to be so. I mean, you said that at the end in the acknowledgements, the first thing you said is that obviously writing a book like this is going to be so complex. It always is when you're writing something like. There's always going to be people looking for plot holes, and even yourself while you're
Yes.
writing, you're going to be looking for your own plot holes.
Yeah.
So I'm quite curious. Obviously, I don't want you to give any of the plot away at all. But did you kind of write it in the order? Did you write it kind of reverse engineer it with the idea that you knew how it was going to end, and then kind of write it backwards? How did you kind of make sure that there was as few plot holes as possible? Put it that way.
Yeah. It's a good question. I mean, it's definitely when you're dealing with I'm trying to phrase it in a
Try not to.
non-spoilery way.
Yeah.
But when you're dealing with not just time travel, but also with multiple not only multiple realities, but also distorted realities, right? So I think there was definitely a balance to making sure that the reader never felt like they didn't. I never wanted the reader not to know exactly what was happening,
Yeah.
in the sense of not that all the answers were there on immediately, but they knew what was happening. They knew, there wasn't like it never, you always wanted to, I always wanted to present it in a way that you got as a reader that this is something that's maybe outside of science, or maybe this is something that's outside of what the machine is supposed to do. So I try to, it was definitely a balancing act. I didn't necessarily reverse engineer it, although did, um, I think I did when I first outlined the book. I knew the ending,
Yeah.
and so, but that's pretty par for the course for me. I typically need to know the ending of even if it's a short story or a novella or a novel. I'm pretty big on always knowing how it ends, and then kind of like, okay, now how do I get to that? How do I get to that
Right.
point? Um, and that's just for whatever reason, that's just the way my brain works. So I definitely knew how it ended, and then I guess in a way I reverse engineered it, but I also knew like I knew what the primary plot plot twist would be. Uh I knew that I wanted to play with certain things to kind of create a sense of you know dis dislodgement, I guess would be the way to put it, whereas the reader knew something was a little bit off, but they weren't 100% sure what it was. And but yeah, ultimately it was all to get to that end point. But it was really also, it's more than just like the science of it, and even it's more than even just the plot. It's also like, how do I emotionally pay this off? So that when the reader gets to the end of the book, have I earned it? And have I earned that, emotional response that hopefully the reader
Yeah.
has? So it's also for me, it's very much especially in this story, I would say also in like Boys in the Valley, that was a big thing for me, was I wanted to make sure that the ending was emotionally earned, so
Right.
that the reader had that feeling of like, oh, like I get it. And I, and they had that like nice fulfilling feeling that you hopefully get when you finish a book, of like, that you feel like it's all been packaged properly. So, I don't know if that 100% answers your question, but
No, no, yeah, yeah,
that's,
100%. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
yeah,
and he
yeah.
definitely does earn that. The earning definitely does earn it because you just, I think the way that Beth is written, it just really just pulls you in and you just feel like you're in her head all the way through the book. So it really works. Definitely, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Uh-huh. I also, I don't want to, obviously, there's got quite this question I want to ask you, but it's really difficult to kind of not spoil things. But
Right.
something that that interested me a lot was there was a few mentions about how Beth wishes she could go back to childhood. I can't remember the exact quote, but she says she'd love to be able to go back to childhood. Um, here we go. So how nice it must be to love life without the psychological, emotional boundaries that rise unbidden and wanted as a person grows into adulthood. And then
Yeah.
she one of the things that she talks about in the book, or she sees in the book. I'm trying not to spoil it. Is when she's actually a 12-year-old. And I imagine, is that something that you wanted to kind of juxtapose? I mean, I don't know if it's I these thoughts go through my mind quite a lot. I'm nearly 50 now, and I'm kind of remembering when I'm 12, 13, 14, how it was to be like this
Yeah.
innocent kid who doesn't have to worry about the world. Was that something that was kind of playing on your own mind and you wanted to juxtapose that into this story specifically?
Yeah, and I think what was fascinating for me was in, how much of the past um was about the emotions of the past and not just the actions of the past. And I think to your point, yeah. So I don't think it's a spoiler because there are to say that when Beth did have relived those moments of childhood, they were not happy moments, right? So
Mhm.
and that's one of the plot points of the book. But so I think it was interesting to compare her you know her distanced version of what she felt the past was compared to what it actually was. And even when she answers the questions they ask, could you just, one of the questions is very purposely, how would you describe your childhood in one word? And she always says the same answer, which is happy.
Yeah.
And but it really, but from the outside perspective looking in, seeing all the stuff that she went through, it's obviously didn't feel happy. And so yeah, it was interesting to juxtapose that. And I thought, I have I really enjoy, generally speaking, with all my work. I really enjoy, I do write about nostalgia a lot. I write about, some of the themes I explore kind of over and over again are like the loss of innocence, um, nos the idea that nostalgia is not necessarily factually accurate, and I have a story that I haven't even written yet that I've always wanted to explore that I might write at some point, which is about a kid who has a part-time job and for summer, and then he's older and he's like a businessman or whatever he is, and he's a grown adult with a family and all that, kids and stuff, and he goes back to that place where he had this part-time job that he remembers so romantically, and it's like, and it's the exact opposite of everything he
Yeah.
remembered. Like the people that he thought, the person that he thought was this amazing person turned out to be kind of a jerk,
Yeah.
and the place isn't as nice as it is, and he remembers it, and all these little details, and it kind of destroys and shatters this sort of remembrance that he had treasured. And I and um and even in what book is it? I talk about I have my upcoming book, The Autumn Springs Retirement Home
Mhm.
Massacre with Nightfire. I get into a little bit of this too because it's all people who are, in their 70s and 80s, and I explore a little bit of the nostalgia of, the memories not necessarily being what being what they actually were versus how they remembered. So yeah, so I think there was an interesting for me with Beth to juxtapose the idea that like she has this idea of this halcyon childhood where actually it was pretty brutal, and then also um, when she starts dealing with uh, the ramifications of using the machine, I think all that plays in as well to that same sense of nostalgia and memory, where she suddenly realizes, you know, that the past isn't what she thought it was, but also like her own daughter has now become sort of this symbolic, character of her own childhood, and she kind of has to like save that. So it's definitely an underlying theme that I
Yeah, yeah,
like.
no,
I like
definitely
digging
felt it. Yeah.
into.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Uh-huh. It's something I mean, talking of nostalgia, exactly the opposite. I mean, it's set in, is it 2044 more or less? 2044, I think it was.
yeah, the near future.
Obviously, yeah, the near future, but at the same time, it didn't feel like if I was reading a futuristic book, which is, I appreciate that because I don't like reading these books where they're all
I
kind
hate
of
it.
reading, there are a few emails and things in there and things, but it
Yeah,
really doesn't feel like I'm reading a futuristic book, which I appreciate. So I imagine that was something that you kind of initially set out to not fall down that pitfall, no?
yeah. I don't. I have a big. Yeah, that was definitely purposeful. I hate when, like, you read about flying cars and it's like,
Yeah.
22 years in the future, or you read about when you read a lot of the older sci-fi books and they talk about things, and they, like, oh, we're on Mars by 2018 or whatever. And so yeah, I try to be very real. I mean, the book is very grounded, and that was part of part of that was something that I wanted to make sure that the book always felt very realistic. That you know the science was very grounded, the characters were very grounded, and that readers could relate. That this wasn't a book about flying cars and um, colonizing Mars. It was really about real people with real jobs and real problems, kind of going through these everyday things. And I just did, just like I do with my historical stuff. I never want to overdo it because again, the story is always first, and then all that other stuff is flavoring in a way. And I think, but there are definitely things in that book where the science is very advanced. The harnessing of negative energy, obviously creating this wormhole in the lab experimentation, the digitization of consciousness. All that stuff is very much quantum computing. All that stuff is like it's in the future, but it's not. But it's not really that ultimately unrealistic. And I
Yeah.
think in my afterword, one of the things I talk about is the science that I based a lot of the time travel elements on, and even the satellite stuff. As it pertains to the questions, that's all based. It's all based in hard science. I actually even had I had a NASA physicist read through
Yeah. It says that in there.
the
Yeah.
entire
Yeah.
book, and he offered me some amazing feedback. But he we everything was applied to very real physics, laws of physics. So yeah, so for me it was about keeping it very grounded and very realistic so that the reader felt like um they could connect with Beth and could connect with what was happening to her. Um and so in that sense it's more of a hard science fiction story versus like a futuristic science fiction story. But at the same time there's speculative elements, which it's kind of been interesting reading some of the early reviews for this book because it's my first science fiction book, and I think some of the science fiction people who are reviewing it are kind of like a little confused by some of the speculative elements, and some of the horror people that are reviewing are kind of confused by the sci-fi elements. And so
Right.
it's always tricky when you double up your genres. Um, but I kind of feel like for me, like I said at the beginning, it's really all about the story, and then I don't really worry about how you want to classify it. Um, but anyway, so yeah. But the point is, I definitely wanted to keep it. The whole point was to keep it very grounded and not get into such um, not make the science too unbelievable so
Overbearing.
that
Right. Yeah.
people even the opening scene where, and this isn't a spoiler, or the first where you first meet adult Beth, and she goes for a run and she kind of taps her smartwatch,
Right.
and that's something we have today, and that's like how much more is it really going to change? Like I mean, like ultimately it's already like a watch. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It can't get much smaller. It can get faster and it can get more powerful and it can do more things. But in 20 years, you're probably going to be playing music through your watch just like you do today. And so those are things that I made very conscious decisions of um, when I was writing. That I think, is it really going to change that much? This particular
Yeah.
thing, I don't think so. But will there be bigger changes? Like, will we be able to harness negative energy? Will we have quantum computing? Yeah, I think we will. So those are things that I try to be very realistic about the timeline.
Mhm. Yeah. Uh-huh. So I mean, but I mean, you said there that this guy from NASA gave you feedback. I mean, how realistic is some of that stuff that you go into that you kind of, I mean, so about two-thirds of the way through, there is some kind of fairly chunky stuff to get through. I mean, it's easy to read and it's easy to understand, but it does kind of gonna get quite technical. How real is that stuff that you talk about?
I think all the base elements are real. It's I would classify it as theoretical physics. It's all based in actual theoretical physics. So take that as definition as you should, which is it's
Right.
theoretical. But theoretical physics means that it's based in it's actually based in hard science. It's not flight of fancy. So like the idea of digitizing consciousness is really just it's all just comes down to like a computing issue. It comes down to computing power. Sending data through a wormhole is very realistic.
Right.
The idea that you could only travel to a point in your own life, like if you were to warp space time, most theoretical scientists would tell you that yes, if you were to do that, it would work, but you couldn't travel to a time before you were existed. So I tried to base a lot of that stuff, keep it very quote unquote real in the book, so that again, so that it was grounded. But and yeah, and it was interesting because I've had a few people read the book for like blurbs and reviews or what have
Mhm.
you. And a couple people have commented to me, I have a really hard time with science
Right.
books, that have science elements. I just can't follow it. Or for whatever reason, it just doesn't. That part of my brain doesn't work. But the comments I got back were that it was very easy for them to follow, which made me
Yeah.
feel good. But it was tricky because you had to, um, I had to, um, make sure the reader knew how this machine worked and how the science worked, and without necessarily, boring the skin off of them.
Yeah.
So I the device that I use in the book I think works. I tried to really keep it conversational and keep it compact so that I was like, these are the basic things that you need to know to understand the story. Um, and I think, and if you want to dig a little deeper on, some of the the universe square law, or if you want to dig deeper on like, having yeah, computer bases on the moon. Um,
Right.
those are all things that are like in theory going to be in practice probably sooner than later. So I think so I think that was all stuff that it was hard for me. It was I wouldn't say it was hard. It was challenging would be the way I'd put it, to make sure that I was getting across enough of the hard science so that you could follow the story and so that you believed the story. Um, without necessarily over beating on the head with it. And having your eyes glaze over as as you're following the story. So
No, no, no,
hopefully
no,
I
really,
found a
it
balance
really,
there.
it really worked well. I mean, because I'm not particularly into my really, really kind of scientific sci-fi stuff, but it worked really well. And even when kind of you start talking about the machine itself and then conscious and humanity and those kind of things and blend them together, it all makes sense. It all made sense really. The kind of the penny dropped pretty quickly, so it all worked really, really well. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and it was fun. And I mentioned this in the afterword too, but it was fun. Um, my favorite anecdote while writing this book was when I was able to go on a Q&A, a Zoom Q&A with Michio Kaku, who I'm a big fan of, and like I've read all his books, and he's an amazing physicist, but he also is an amazing theoretical physicist. He has wonderful ideas about the future, and anyway, but I was able to ask him, because one of the linchpins of the story is, because you can't send mass or matter through a wormhole, it would collapse. So that's the whole thing. That's the reason time travel doesn't work. So so I was kind of like, well, if you're just sending data, would that would that work? And that was one of the questions I got to ask him that live. I said, if you were to send data through a wormhole, would the wormhole sustain it? And he said yes, it would. And he kind of thought about it for a second. He's like, yeah. And so that was pretty cool. And the reality is, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a physicist. I didn't even graduate from college. So it's not like I have this amazing scientific background or anything. It's very, very much a layman's take on a lot of theoretical physics from people who are much smarter than I am when it comes to that stuff. But I tried my best to make it as factual as possible. And
Yeah.
same as I do with historical fiction. I don't overlook the factual elements uh, because I want to make sure that I want to make sure that the story feels real, and I want to make sure that the story in some ways, the story is as real as possible, because I think that does affect how a reader experiences it. And even though I might get some things wrong, like when I wrote a Civil War novella called Shiloh, and I had a little feedback on that, we'll call it, because I I I called the gun I called gunboats gunships, and
Right.
that technically they're gunboats. They weren't called gunships. Even I was so anyway, that was something that I got like a lot of like hate mail about from Civil War
Right.
enthusiasts, and I was like, there's also angels and demons and green blood, but
Sure.
but that's the one thing they pick on. So yeah, so with something like this, you want to be, I know I'm probably going to get a lot of grief for some things I probably did wrong, but all I can say is I tried my best. And I
And
had
it's a piece
one
of
early
fiction as
review.
well. It's not.
It is, but I think when you're writing it, I think when you're writing horror, you can get away with that a bit more. I think when you delve
Yeah.
into science fiction, I think people are a little um, less forgiving. And
Right.
I had one early reviewer say that I was like, in his afterward, he's like furiously apologizing for all the things he got wrong. And that wasn't really how I saw the afterward. My point of the afterward was to say that this is very much a layman's version of this these theoretical
Mhm.
these theoretical physics theories. So I don't want to sit here and say, hey, I'm this like amazing scientist and I know how all this stuff,
Yeah,
how every screw is twisted.
exactly the
But
opposite now. Yeah.
and I also wanted to give credit to the people who inspired me and who gave me those ideas. But I was lucky in that I did at least get to ask Michio Kaku one question, and the fact that I did have Les Johnson, who's with NASA, read through it, and give me some great feedback. I feel like, look, if if a NASA physicist is telling me that, there's nothing in this book that's completely out of line, then that my confidence is high for the general reader.
Sure. Yeah. And but one last thing about this book is it feel well, the same as all of your books virtually. They feel they've got a really cinematic feel to them.
Mm.
When you write it, do you kind of? I mean, you said that the story is the most important, but for you, is it important that the stories in the book is it reads well, or do you kind of does your mind work almost like you're seeing it on a big screen, seeing it cinematically when you write?
I would say it's a combination of the two, if I'm being
Okay.
honest. I sometimes in my lower moments as a writer, I see if I get a particularly bad review or whatever, and I think about like if you knew how much time I committed to looking at every sentence and every paragraph and every word and over and over and over and over again, you'd be a lot more forgiving about the little thing that you're nitpicking because it's I think a lot of I'm going to position this a different way. For me, for me specifically, the prose is very, 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 very important. I'm very, you know, probably somewhat arrogantly or egotistically very proud of my writing. And I'm a self-taught writer. I didn't go to school for it. I don't know. There are a lot of things I had to teach myself about how to write and the mechanics of writing. But um, but as far as like the prose is concerned, meaning in my mind, the beauty of the language is something that um, I try very hard to get right. And I spend a lot of time finessing the way sentences are constructed or the way something is described. It's very important to me that it's has the impact that I want it to have. Either it's
Yeah.
visceral or it's beautiful or it's thought provoking or it's, whatever it is descriptive, in a certain way. So I take, I, the writing for me is the most important, I would say almost the most important thing. And then the story is, right there, 1B, and making sure that the beats uh, are happy, the pacing is right, the tone is right, the story is being told in the right way. And as far as the visual element, cinematic element, I think that's just the way, I think the way my mind works is when I'm writing, um, I'm very much dictating what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing.
Right.
So, so it is like a movie playing in my head, and I am dictating what is going on inside my mind. And so I think in that sense, maybe I do see it a little bit, the book's a little bit cinematically. Um, I think there are a lot of things about having approach that are positive. And one is I think it's easier for the reader to imagine things if you describe it in the way you're imagining it. But I also, without overdoing it so that they don't have their own concept of things. But I also think there's a lot of things when I read books that I can with that kind of frustrates me a little bit is like a lot of people I don't think about is like staging and blocking of characters of a room. How does it drives me crazy when the character in a book will be on one side of the room doing one thing and the next sentence they're like sitting in a chair doing something else, and I'm like, well, how did they
Right.
get from there to there? And
Mhm.
and so and where are these other people in relation to this person? Are they yelling from another room? Are they right next to them? So for me, I think a lot of those I think when you're dealing with characters and stuff like that, and you kind of think of it as a play,
Yeah.
I think you want it. What a lot of writers, I think, ignore, or I shouldn't say ignore, don't necessarily think about is the staging of the blocking and the staging of the scene and how it's happening and how physically it's all happening. So yeah, so I think I combine those two. I don't worry about like I don't worry about, oh, would this be a good movie, or would this ever be
Yeah.
filmable? I don't worry about those things. Uh I think about it. Like if I if I write a novel, I might, I would consider like, hey, this might actually be a pretty cool movie. This might be a pretty interesting TV series, but it's never part of the process. So yeah, but I would say it's definitely a combination of I think when I write that first draft, I'm very much just basically writing down what's happening in my head. Um, and then when I get the second draft for me is when I really go through and take my time with the actual prose, and I really focus on cleaning up all the writing, making sure it reads well. And I love, I'm a big, I'm a big poet nut. I read a lot of poetry. I read a lot of, you know, um, fiction, literature from the, mid-century to classics and all that stuff. And I love, like, there's nothing more exciting for me as a writer than like a really pretty turn of phrase, or if I got a sentence perfect. So
Yeah.
that's something that I definitely focus on. But I would say the order is first draft, it's all like, here's the story, here's what's happening. Second draft is really, okay, now I'm going to go through, I'm going to sweeten it. I'm one of the rare writers who probably, I usually add about 10,000 words to my draft between the first
Right.
draft and the second draft. Um, Whereas like to cut back. And then, and then three, five, four, and so on is when you're really going through and honing it and doing all the little mechanical fixes that you have to do. So
I mean, it's being very, very kind of, I don't know what the word is, pedantic about it, but very, very specific about the prose. It must be really difficult to decide exactly when the book is finished for you, no? Ready to release.
it can be tricky. And sometimes that's where having like, that's where having editors and agents come in, and a beta reader, or somebody who's can say like, because you really want to nail that ending. And I think sometimes you're like, you end it, and then you're like have this like sort of like trickling thing going on, where maybe you go on for two or three more sentences, or like, no, you just end it there. You don't need all that stuff. Um, and I think with time travel, like I said, I already knew how it was going to end, so I really just had to get to that point. But you definitely want to land you want to land that last emotional beat, and that last plot beat. And I think it was interesting. There was a moment when I was writing, directly to your point, I was writing the Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre, and I outlined. I'm a pretty extensive outliner, although I didn't really outline that book as much. But I had I was writing uh, one of the last chapters, and in my mind, I had another chapter that I was going to write after this chapter, and I had like, this is going to get me here, and then the ending is going to be this piece. And when I finished the chapter I was writing, um, I just sort of sat back like and was like, that's it, that's the end. Like that's the perfect moment to end on. Even and I just kind of basically scrapped this whole idea for the actual
Actual
ending
ending.
that I
Yeah.
had. So yeah, so sometimes you just feel it. It's just a vibe, it's just a instinct where you're just like, oh, that's it. Stop, stop, stop. As far as like the rewriting part of it, that never ending, yeah, there comes a point where you just have to be like, the book is done.
That's it. Can't do it
Because
anymore.
you
Yeah.
could go on, I could go on forever and ever and ever. And I'm sure any writer who's you talk to could say the same thing, where there's always a better way to say something. There's always a cleaner way to, describe something, or a cooler thing that you'll think about later. Like, oh, I should have
Mhm.
added this word, or there's always going to be a mistake that the eight proofreaders, the editor, the agent, and you never saw for whatever weird reason. And so yeah, you could always continue, but I've gotten to points where where I'll be rewriting a book before I turn it in, and I'll have to say like, it's just going to have to be, it's done. I have to just It has to be done. And sometimes deadlines help with that because you're like, well, it's definitely done because I don't have a choice.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, I think you have to have that self-control as a writer to realize it's never going to be 100%
yeah,
the best thing you could do. But you have to like, sometimes you have to live with like 98 or 99% because otherwise you would never write anything else. So,
yeah,
it's a gut thing. Like it's, like, and there's also so many times you can read your own book before, like your eyes are blurring and, you can't, you have no perspective anymore. I think right around the 10th time through is about where that starts happening to me. So yeah, but at some point you just have to say like,
you'll
it
let
is
it
what it
go.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I guess I always wonder why a lot of actors say they can never see themselves on the screen, and I guess it's kind of the same thing. It's just gotta let it go. That was the performance that I
Yeah.
chose, and that's it.
Well, yeah, I don't ever, people ask me about my audiobooks and I'll be like, I've never listened to one of my
No,
audiobooks. I have no interest in
no.
hearing my words spoken aloud by somebody else because all I will think is I should have fixed that. I should have changed
Yeah,
that. Oh,
exactly. Yeah,
that was bad. So I never listen to audiobooks. And once my book is published, that's it. I don't look at it again
don't
because
look at it again.
all you're gonna do is find the things that you could have done differently
I
and the
know.
things you could have fixed. And once there's nothing you can do about it, that's
Let it
it.
go.
Move on to the next
Yeah,
thing. Yeah. I'm
exactly.
sure for actors it's the same way. If they're probably That's probably they don't like to watch their own thing because it's like I did what I did, it's done, I'm on to
It's
the
not
next
going to
thing.
change.
And
Yeah,
it's not gonna change, so why even bother looking at it? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Talking of actors, obviously you've got. I wanted to speak to you about this A24 film that's coming out. It's an adaptation of one of your short stories. I
Hmm.
think you've been on set and everything. How involved were you with the whole process? And I think on Instagram there's a few photos I've seen that you were with the actors when they rapped and things like that. So how involved were you with
Yeah.
the writer? Because it was screenwritten by, let me see here.
Will
Will
Sudik.
Sudik, no, he's written episodes of Ash versus Evil Dead and things like that. So how involved were you with him
Yeah,
in the writing
Westworld. Yeah.
process?
Yeah. So that was, every case is different. I mean, this is the first of my stories that's actually gone the distance, where it's actually been filmed and it's actually going to come out in the theater. Whereas I have many other projects that are sort of in these different weird, awkward stages of development, where like maybe
Right.
they have a director and they have a script, um, but they haven't gotten to that point where it's like greenlit by the studio and they're casting it. But all that stuff that comes before, the green lighting part, to your point, all that development stuff, the writing of the script, um the ideas of what the movie will be and how to adapt it and all that stuff, it really changes. It's really case by case. And I say all that to say that with Alter, I was very fortunate that the director, Igor Abramenko, who did a wonderful movie called Sputnik,
Yeah, it's a fantastic
um,
movie. I've seen that one. Yeah.
yeah, and Will Sudik, they were big fans of my work. So they came to me versus like my representation wasn't out pitching that particular story. They just happened to read the story and
Right.
they approached me about adapting it before A24 was involved. So that was unique in the sense that they were coming at it from sort of like, we love your work. There's a sort of respect there of the work and of the story and of for me. So they came at it from a very much a perspective of like, we really want you involved as we go through the process of developing the ideas for the story. So, and even like the visuals and some of them, like the effect. So all that to say, I wasn't in any way, I wasn't in any way yesing or knowing anything per se, but I did spend a lot of time um, listening to their ideas and giving them feedback on those ideas. Um, and and also, generally just kind of like being part of the process from sort of almost like a bystander, but an insider in the sense that I was very much part of every part of the process. So I was really lucky. I didn't. I'm very aware, cognizant of like. I told them this 100 times. This is your guys' thing. It's your vision. Um, you it's Will's script and it's Igor's vision on the screen. So I really didn't want to get in the way of any of that. So if they asked me specific questions, I would respond. But like Will and I spent hours on the phone, um, or in person talking about his ideas for how to expand the story. Um, so those were conversations that we had. So it was really fun to be part of all that. And then, yeah, I got to, A24, um, was very generous. They flew me out to Canada for a week. I spent a week on set, got to meet all the actors, which is great. And got to be part of that process. So yeah, so that was something where um, I was definitely included, I would say.
Right.
But whereas, um, with some projects that are coming up, I definitely would want to have more of a say in how things go. I would want to have more control. There was another project called Death My Old Friend. It's based on my short story of the same name that I actually wrote the script for example. So, I wrote the screenplay, and then they ended up hiring another writer to make adjustments for the director. But so it's all different levels. So that one I was very much involved, and then there's another project that I have that a studio is doing, and I literally didn't even know, you know, what was happening with it until like I had dinner with the director and he informed me that there was a script and they were going to be shooting in a few months. So
Right.
it was, I was like, so sometimes it really did case by case, but with Alter, it was very fun to be part of it. A24 has been great. I'm actually going to be doing, A24 is actually going to be publishing, um, a standalone edition of the story
About all right.
along with, yeah, I wrote a sequel called The Fate of Nero, which is a sequel to the short story Alter in a way. It carries through one of the characters, um, and that'll also be part of that book. So yes, I'm working pretty closely with them, in some different ways, and yeah, it's been fun. I'm hoping a movie's going to come out, later this year. The plan
Uh-huh.
is late summer, so hopefully that stays. I think a lot of it has to do with how fast they can create all the visual effects and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I think that's the current plan.
Have you actually seen an early version of the film yet, or is it still they're still editing it together?
No, no, I haven't seen anything other than what I saw on set. Um, I was obviously got to watch everything that they're filming
Yeah.
and but no, I haven't seen a cut or anything like that. I probably will before it's actually screened. I'm sure they'll probably send me something to look at. But yeah, no, I haven't seen anything yet. But I have seen some of the um, I saw a lot of the visual effects, um, like storyboards. So when they have a movie like this, they hire like an effects company, a VFX company, and they create these models of what the monsters look like and what
Right.
this crazy area looks like and what this. So I got to see a lot of that already, which was very fun. And I got to see all the sets, obviously, and the production designer on the movie. Very kindly like showed me through we kind of did a walkthrough of all the different props and all the storyboards for all the different scenes and we got to see the giant stages where the sets were built and stuff like that. So yeah, so it was really cool to be involved, but I didn't have any like I wouldn't say I had any input other than just basically
Right.
like every now and then we'd do a call and they would want my blessing on something. We're just
Right.
gonna say this is your guys' thing. It's blessed. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I'm also glad that they kept the story intact. Um, they expanded the story, but the short story it still exists. They didn't just take like the one or two elements and kind of completely reimagine the whole thing. So I feel like the short story is still very much intact, and then they kind of added on to the story, which was kind of nice to see versus just completely overhauling it.
And it doesn't get much better than A24. I mean, I've yet to see an A24 film that didn't work for me. So you're in good company
Yeah,
there.
they're great to work with. They're a great studio. They're the fact that they're still creating original content versus stuff that's based on pre-existing, like sequels or
Yeah.
superhero movies and all that kind of stuff. It's nice that they're doing, fairly large budget original movies. Is great. So they're a great studio, and they've been awesome um, for me and very whatever. I'm hoping that we can do, and I'd love to work with them again on something. So we'll just see how everything plays out.
Fingers crossed, brilliant. Yeah, well, just to finish up before I let you go, then obviously I want to talk about this. I mean, you've got the third rule of time travel coming out next, but then you've also got this other book, which I think is delves more into the horror genre more. No, this time again, can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Uh,
The
Autumn Springs.
That's right. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre. Definitely is horror. Um, yeah, that comes out September 30th from
yeah.
Nightfire, and in the UK it'll be out
It's in
from
the UK and
Orbit.
the US the same release date, no, the same publishing date. No, yeah.
They're usually the same
I think
date.
it was. I had a look on Amazon earlier, and I think it was in the UK. It was the same as the US one. Yeah,
September 30th. Yeah. So probably, yes, probably the same date. I think sometimes it's like one day different, but yes,
yeah.
same date. And then so yeah, that's it's actually my, it is horror. It's it's kind of a slasher,
Right.
obviously, but it takes place in a retirement home. And but it's also kind of it was my first I want to say it was kind of it's a book where I really wanted to have like that whodunit element.
Right.
I hadn't really written anything like that before, where there's a pretty strong mystery element to the story. So it was kind of playing with that, and then combining it with the slasher element, which is very prevalent. But then also, I write this in the afterword of the book. But when I first pitched that book to Nightfire, to my editor, it was kind of like it's going to be sort of like a dark comedy, very violent, and but also had these like kind of moments where you're chuckling because I do these kind of gags and whatever, and then from when I started outlining the book to when I finished writing it, which was about a 1 year period, I had both my parents passed away, and I
Oh,
had to
sorry to hear
deal
that.
with, thank you, but I had to deal with a lot of like what was going on with them. Like I had to spend 2 months with my father who had dementia, and had to take care of him and nurse him and all that kind of stuff, and and help my mom who couldn't walk, and she had to go to therapy. So there are all these, and then also talking to them about like what they were feeling and what they were thinking, and what, like, discussing maybe their option, what are the options, and all that stuff really made me rethink the whole book. I was kind of like, man, there's so much more to say here about
Yeah.
when you reach this stage of life. There's so much I want to say about it, and so I really infused a lot of those personal experiences into the book and into the characters. And so that made the book to me much more interesting. And there's still a slasher. It's still really fun. It's still super violent. Um, and still like a mystery, but also it was really interesting for me to get into themes of aging, and what are the desires, when you think about someone who's turning 80, what do they desire out of life? How do they think about the future? How do they think about um, their kids, their children, and how do their children think about them? And so a lot of that stuff um, basically was baked into the story. So it was really both a cathartic and also, you know, obviously emotional experience writing the book. But I also think it made the book really, um, I don't know, just really a lot richer, and a lot more, had a lot more to say than maybe I'd originally intended. So that was great for me because, a lot of times when when I come up with a story, I always have to think about, okay, well, here's the plot, and like I'm about the story I mentioned I'm about to start writing, has to do with, like, there's a cult element, there's an alien element, there's a monster, there's all these like set pieces in my head of like how different things will play out, and these fun, like, bang up, shoot up, crazy moments in the story. And those are all the really fun stuff that like creates a path, from A to Z for the story. But then my next thought is, okay, well, what's the human element of this? What is the part of the where because for me as a writer, I need to really have that, because I really need the characters to feel fleshed out, and I really want the characters to have depth, and I really want the characters to be complex. I don't want black and white two-dimensional characters. I want very gray characters. I get a lot of comments about my writing where people feel like they don't like my characters because they're unlikable, or they don't do the things that maybe they should, like we've been we've as a trope you're expecting them to do, and I kind of play on those expectations a little bit with my characters. I like to make them very gray. Sometimes good people do bad things and bad people do good things, right? If you read Boys in the Valley, David is a great example of that. Brother Johnson is a great example of that, playing with expectations. So
Sure.
with Autumn Springs Retirement Home Massacre, that was a really interesting thing for me to play with, was really finding some depth to these characters. And with the farm that I mentioned, that's my working title for the new book, is so what's the human connection? And it became to me that it's a father daughter relationship, and kind of the intricate complexities that might have if within a context of maybe a mother having passed away early and the daughter and the father being maybe somewhat estranged or maybe not seeing eye to eye on things. And then of course there's all this chaos and supernatural crazy stuff going on. So but that's the emotional core of the story. And I think with like Autumn Springs Retirement Massacre, the emotional core of the story is Rose, who's my protagonist, and she has some deep-seated issues and that she's working through as the story goes. So, as you're getting through all of this kind of, call it fun, entertaining, crazy stuff, Rose is also kind of having this emotional arc, where she's kind of getting from A to Z, and you're experiencing those things with her as the story goes. So for me, it's very important to have the two things packed together, because I think it enriches the story, and I think it makes the experience much more memorable, and allows readers to really connect with the characters. And then because they're connecting with the characters, when bad things happen to them, it's even more you know it's even more electric for the reader, because now you're actually either rooting for that person, or you're emotionally invested in that person. So when I pull out the rug, hopefully it has a better response, a bigger and better response from the reader, as to what happened, which makes the story ultimately more entertaining
Oh,
and
definitely,
more
yes.
memorable. Yeah.
Well, I can't wait to read that one. But I mean the same applies with Beth in this book. I mean, she does she has certain things about her that I mean, the way she treats the guy who's kind of her sidekick as well, and then
Yeah,
she starts
right.
to realize things. Well, all these kind of things really kind of help you to feel for and empathize with, and it really works really well. Yeah. So, well, yeah, I can't wait
Yeah,
to read that one as well. Yeah.
there's a moment in Third World Time Travel that I was really happy with the way it worked, and I don't want to, I guess I can't give it away, but there was I think when it's not just how you, the reader, thinks of Beth, it's how Beth thinks of others, to your point. And I
Yeah.
think, whether she trusts them too much or whether she doesn't trust them enough was also an interesting thing for me, to play with throughout the story. And I think, subverting expectations with, because Beth thinks of the character a certain way, the reader is going to think of the character that the same way. And I think when I can kind of, do a switcheroo on that, it's wonderful, because you're seeing Beth react to that, but you as a reader are also reacting to that. So there's different things you can do like that with to kind of make it more immersive. And even with like Boys in the Valley, having Peter's POV be first person and having the other four POVs being third person, very purposeful, and because I wanted, when you got to the end of that journey, it would all make sense and it would all connect, if not plot wise, emotionally. And yeah, Autumn Springs, I'm very excited about that book actually. And I think, you know, uh, it was really fun for me to do that kind of a story um, where I got to kind of like, be the guy who knew what was going to happen, and toy sort of with the reader as to like drop all those little clues and drop all those little red herrings, throughout. Was a lot of fun. And it was interesting because that was the only book I've ever written, that I didn't outline, which is insane, because that's exactly the kind of book you should outline, because you want to know
Because of
what's
the
going to happen.
red
But it
herrings.
wasn't
Yeah.
even until I think, down to the last, um, I think I want to say like two or three chapters before I actually firmly decided on who the who the bad guy was.
Yeah.
Um, and then I went back and kind of tweaked a few things, but I mean, I knew it was going to be one. I was going to go one way or go another way, but it wasn't really until I was at the end, that I had made that hard decision. And even when I said earlier, like stopping at that chapter and not writing that next chapter, that also ultimately changed a lot of the whodunit part of the mystery part of it. So in that sense, it was kind of cool to write without the outline because I was sort of discovering things at the same time the reader was.
Yeah.
I would never want to do it again because it's incredibly anxiety inducing. Um, and I
No,
really
but
like
I
having the
actually guess it
comfort.
is, and it was anxiety, but I guess it's entertaining for you as well to kind of treat yourself to
Yeah.
kind of this story that you don't even know what's going to happen yourself. No.
Well, and that goes back to the writing because a lot of writers say they don't like the outline because they be boring. I already know what happens and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And those guys are like geniuses in my mind because I really, but I like knowing because that way I can really focus on what I'm doing in the moment. I can really focus on because if I know what the next chapter is, or if I know what happens to this character in 3 chapters or whatever it is, I can really focus on the scene I'm writing and I can making that the best scene possible. And um, and dropping a little, maybe little kernels or hints or whatever to kind of sweeten things for the reader, so that when you get to that reveal, you're kind of more, you've been sort of like, there's been a ramp up to it, even if you don't really realize there's been a ramp up to it. So, but yeah, so for me, I like to read that. I like outlining because I just love being like, all right, I don't have to worry about what's going to happen next. I don't have to worry about the big picture. I can just focus on this scene with these two people at this table having a conversation. What's the best way to write this scene? What's really making sure the dialogue is perfect, really making sure I'm writing it the best way I can, and playing with some of the stuff that I know is going to happen later a little bit. That all helps. When I was writing Alto, the short story of the A24 movie, knowing what happened in that story, um, was really allowed me. There's like a lot of ramp up before the actual shoe drops in Alter,
Mhm.
and but because I knew what was going to happen, I was able to kind of like seed little elements of darkness into the way I described things, into just the way I kind of the way the characters maybe interacted, just little hints, so that the reader was like, even subconsciously, maybe knowing that something was not quite right or something was on the horizon that was not going to be a good thing. Um, and so that's really fun for me to do as a writer. So I don't mind knowing how the story ends. Because that way I can focus on, the present, when I'm writing in the moment.
Mhm. Brilliant. Listen, I'm going to leave you on that. Thank you so much for your time, Philip. It's been so a pleasure to speak to you. I
Yeah,
wish you
thank you.
all the best of luck with the film and also with the all these different books that you've got coming out soon. And
Thank
hopefully,
you.
time permitting and job permitting, I'll see you when you get over here to Spain for the festival, the book festival.
Yeah, I'm excited to come to Celsius 232. I've never been to Spain, so
All
it'll be
right.
good to get out there. And yeah, and for whatever reason, my books tend
Yeah,
to
they
do
do
pretty
really well over
well
here. Yeah.
in
Mhm.
Spain.
I think
So
when I was looking at Amazon, I think there's even I think there's a Spanish version of Alta, just Alta on its own. I think there's a book as well. I think I saw. I think I spotted
oh, there could
recently.
be. I don't know. Maybe I don't remember if I did that or not. But I know like I know Gothic has done very well. I know Boys in the Valley has done very well.
Yeah.
Those are both published by Dilettanto Mentes Editorial, and Third Rule of Time Travel is going to be coming out in
All right.
Spain as well. So there's a publisher already sold. So yeah. So for some reason, I'm really happy. So it'll be fun to get over there and meet some of the readers and sign books and do that kind of stuff. So it'll be different for
Brilliant.
me, but fun.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we'll bump into each other there. And
Yeah. Hopefully.
thanks very much for your time. And I'll keep you apprised of when this goes live. And speak to you again sometime soon, I hope.
Awesome. All right. Thank you,
All
Howard.
right.
I
Thanks
really
so much for your
appreciate
time.
it.
Really appreciate it, Philip.
All right, man.
All
Talk
right.
soon.
Cheers then.
Bye.
Take care of yourself. Have a good day.
Bye.